3 disturbing true roommate horror stories. 1. My roommate wasn't on the lease, and neither was his past. 2. The guy I shared an apartment with knew when I slept. 3. I found out why every roommate before me moved out suddenly. I moved to the US. For grad school, thinking the hardest part would be rent, paperwork, and learning how to microwave frozen food without messing it up. And honestly, finding a roommate through an online housing board felt like a small win at the time because the apartment was cheap, close to campus, and the guy living there, Mark, sounded normal enough in his messages, friendly but brief, the kind of person who used periods at the end of sentences, which oddly felt reassuring. And when I first met him in person, nothing screamed danger, just an average guy in his late 20s, pale, tired eyes, polite smile, and a habit of speaking softly as if he didn't want to disturb the walls. And he showed me around the place. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, small kitchen, old building but solid, he said. And I didn't think much of it when he mentioned the landlord was hands-off, because, hey, less hassle, right? So I moved in that weekend, signed the lease digitally, paid my share, and started settling into what I thought would be a quiet, boring chapter of my life. But almost immediately, small things felt off. Nothing dramatic, just little quirks that didn't add up, like how Mark never seemed to leave the apartment, ever. No job, no classes, no friends dropping by. Yet he always had money for rent and groceries. And whenever I asked what he did, he'd deflect with jokes or vague answers like remote stuff or consulting. Which I shrugged off because, again, America, people do all kinds of things. But then there was the lease, or rather, the lack of it. One evening while organizing my documents, I asked him casually if he wanted a copy of the lease for his records, and he paused, just for a second too long, then said, "Oh, I'm not actually on it," and laughed like it was no big deal, said he'd been there before all that, and the way he said it made my stomach tighten, like he was talking about a time rather than a contract. And I asked how long he'd lived there, and he said, longer than anyone else, which sounded like a joke until I realized he wasn't smiling. Still, I told myself not to overthink it. Stress makes you imagine things, right? But the nights were worse. That's when it really started getting under my skin, because I'd hear him moving around at odd hours, slow footsteps outside my door, stopping, lingering, then walking away. And when I'd open my door, the hallway would be empty, lights off, silent. And I told myself old buildings creak, people pace, it's fine, except one night around 3 a.m., I woke up to the unmistakable sound of breathing, not mine, not from another room, but right outside my door. Shallow, controlled breaths, like someone trying not to be heard. And I froze, heart pounding, staring at the door handle, waiting for it to turn. But it didn't. After what felt like forever, the breathing stopped. Footsteps retreated, and the apartment went quiet again. The next morning, I confronted him lightly, half joking, said, "You were up late last night," and he looked genuinely confused. Said he'd slept through the night, no idea what I was talking about. And the scary part was how convincing he was. Calm, steady eye contact, no nervousness. And that's when I started noticing other things, like how he knew my schedule better than I did. He'd mention when I had early classes, when I stayed up late, when I skipped dinner, comments like, "You didn't come home until after midnight," or "You slept in today," always said casually, but I never remembered telling him those things. And when I asked how he knew, he'd shrug and say, "Thin walls," but our walls weren't that thin, and my door was always locked, or at least I thought it was. Until one afternoon I came home early and found my bedroom door slightly open, just a crack, the way it looks when someone tries to make it seem untouched, and my chest tightened because I was sure I'd locked it that morning. I checked my room. Nothing missing, but things felt subtly wrong, like the air had been disturbed. My desk chair angled differently, my notebook not exactly where I left it, and that night, I pushed a chair under the door handle before sleeping, something I hadn't done since childhood, and it helped, a little, but paranoia crept in anyway, eating at me. And then came the basement. The building had a shared basement with storage units, dusty, dim, the kind of place you only go when you absolutely have to. And one day the landlord emailed asking tenants to label their storage boxes properly, so I went down there, flashlight in hand. And that's where I saw it. Mark's storage area wasn't boxes or old furniture. It was folders, dozens of them, stacked neatly on shelves, each labeled with a name and a date, and my stomach dropped when I saw one with my name on it, fresh ink, current date, hands shaking. I pulled it out and opened it. Inside were printed photos of me entering the building, leaving for class, sitting in my room through my window, screenshots of my social media, notes about my habits, my sleep patterns, what I ate, when I showered, and at the back, a section labeled duration, with a list of names before mine, each followed by a number of months, none longer than 8. I didn't finish reading. I dropped the folder and ran, heart pounding so hard I thought I'd pass out. I locked myself in my room and called the landlord, the police, campus security, everyone. And when officers came and searched the apartment, Mark was gone. His room empty, no clothes, no personal items, like he'd never lived there. The landlord arrived confused, insisted no one named Mark had ever been on the lease. Not now, not before. And when I showed them the storage folders, they were gone too. The shelves empty, dust, undisturbed, like I'd imagined the whole thing. But the police took it seriously enough to move me out that night. And as I packed, shaking, trying not to cry, one officer quietly told me something that still haunts me. He said this wasn't the first call from that building. Previous tenants had complained about a phantom roommate, someone who wasn't on the lease, someone who watched, who stayed just long enough and then disappeared. And no one ever stayed long enough to put it together until now. I moved apartments, changed numbers, deleted social media, tried to forget. But sometimes, when I'm alone late at night, I still feel it. That sense of being observed. And I can't shake the thought that Mark wasn't just a person. Not really. Because when I searched public records later, there was no trace of him, no ID, no employment, nothing. And the most disturbing part, the thing that keeps me awake, is the realization that I don't know why he stopped at 8 months, why none of us ever lasted longer, or what would have happened if someone did. When I moved into a shared apartment in Chicago after landing my first real job, I told myself this was adulthood finally kicking in. New city, new start, new roommate. And honestly, at first, it felt almost too normal. The apartment was on the 3rd floor of an old brick building near the L train. Noisy but charming. And my roommate, Ethan, seemed like the kind of guy you barely notice. Mid-30s, worked in IT, kept to himself, clean but not obsessively so. The kind of presence that fades into the background. And that was exactly what I wanted. No drama. No forced friendship. Just someone to split rent with and coexist peacefully. And for the first couple of weeks, that's exactly how it was. Polite hellos, shared fridge space, occasional small talk about the weather or the train delays. Nothing memorable. Until one evening, after a long day at work, I came home exhausted, collapsed onto my bed without even changing, and drifted off, only to wake up suddenly in the middle of the night with that strange feeling you get when you know someone is watching you, heart racing, eyes snapping open to darkness. And that's when I heard his voice, soft, calm, coming from the other side of my bedroom door, saying my name, just once, like a question. And I froze, too scared to answer, too scared to breathe, and after a few seconds of silence I heard his footsteps move away, slow and deliberate, and the apartment went quiet again. The next morning I convinced myself it had been a dream, stress, new environment, imagination running wild. So I laughed it off, even joked about weird dreams at work. But that sense of unease didn't leave. It lingered like a bad smell you can't quite locate. And then things escalated in small, almost clever ways. Like how Ethan started commenting on my sleep, saying things like, "You toss a lot at night," or "You talk in your sleep sometimes." Always said casually, as if it were common knowledge. And when I asked how he knew, he'd shrug and say the walls were thin. But my room was at the end of the hallway, far from his, and I always slept with my door closed. Sometimes locked, or at least I thought I did. And then there were the mornings when I'd wake up feeling oddly sore, like I hadn't slept at all, with vague impressions of movement, shadows in my dreams, hands adjusting my blanket, footsteps near my bed, and I'd tell myself not to be ridiculous. This wasn't a horror movie. This was real life. Chicago. Rent, bills, reality. But the first real crack in my denial came when I bought a cheap fitness tracker. One of those basic ones that logs sleep and movement. And after a few nights, I noticed something strange in the data. Brief periods of activity logged while I was supposedly asleep. Steps recorded between 2 and 4 a.m., always around the same time, and I laughed nervously, assuming it was a glitch, until I cross-checked it with my phone's sleep app and saw the same interruptions, consistent, nightly. And that's when a horrible thought crept in. What if I wasn't leaving my bed at all? What if someone else was moving me? The idea felt insane, yet it explained too much. And once that door in my mind cracked open, everything rushed through. The way my door sometimes wasn't locked when I woke up. The way items on my nightstand shifted slightly. My phone facing a different direction. My blanket folded neatly when I knew I'd kicked it off. And the worst part was how Ethan acted during all this. Calm, friendly, almost gentle. Asking if I was sleeping okay, offering chamomile tea. Suggesting melatonin, like he was concerned, like he'd Ed. And that made my skin crawl more than anger ever could. So one night, driven by equal parts fear and desperation, I decided to stay awake. I drank coffee late, kept the lights on, scrolled aimlessly, telling myself I wouldn't sleep no matter what. But exhaustion is sneaky, and sometime after midnight, my eyes grew heavy, the screen blurred, and I drifted off despite my best efforts, only to snap awake to the sound of my door opening, slow, careful, the faint click of the latch. And there he was, standing in the doorway, silhouetted by the dim hallway light, watching me, not moving, not speaking, just standing there like he'd done this 1,000 times before, and my body refused to respond. Sleep paralysis, that's what my brain screamed. You're dreaming, you can't move. But then he stepped closer, and I felt the mattress dip under his weight, felt his hand brush my arm, light, almost affectionate. And I wanted to scream, but nothing came out, tears streaming down my temples as he whispered, "You're safe. You always are." And then as suddenly as it started, he stood up, adjusted my blanket, and left, closing the door softly behind him. And when I finally regained control and jumped out of bed, shaking, I locked the door, shoved furniture against it, and sat there until sunrise, heart pounding, replaying every second. And the next day, I called in sick and went straight to the police, told them everything, the watching, the data, the nightly visits, but without proof, with UT footage. It sounded like paranoia, stress, sleep disorders, and they suggested a doctor, maybe therapy, and I left feeling smaller, helpless, doubting myself, which is exactly what he must have been counting on, because that night, he was bolder, rattling my door handle, whispering through the wood, telling me to open up, saying he was worried, saying I needed help, and something inside me snapped, survival instinct kicking in hard, and I called a friend, begged her to come get me, packed a bag while he paced outside my room, muttering. And when my friend arrived and knocked loudly, his voice vanished, the apartment falling silent, and when we opened the door, Ethan was gone, his room empty, bed stripped, computer missing, like he'd evaporated. And I never went back. Broke the lease, lost money, didn't care, just wanted distance, safety, answers. But those came months later in the most chilling way possible, when I received an email from an unknown address, subject line blank, containing a single attachment, a video file, and against my better judgment. I opened it, hands trembling, and there I was, asleep in my bed, filmed from the corner of my room, night after night, him entering, touching, watching, sometimes sitting for hours, and at the end of the video, text appeared on the screen. Simple, calm, terrifying. You always sleep so deeply. And that's when I realized the truth that still makes my blood run cold. He hadn't just known when I slept, he'd made sure I stayed too. Hatway. I answered a Craigslist ad for a roommate in a quiet suburb outside Portland, Oregon, thinking I'd finally caught a break because the house was clean, affordable, and owned by a guy named Daniel, who seemed almost too polite, mid-40s, soft-spoken, kind eyes, the sort of person your parents would trust instantly. And during the tour, he kept emphasizing rules. No parties, no overnight guests, no noise after 10, all reasonable, all comforting. And I needed stability at the time, so I agreed without hesitation, signed the paperwork, moved in, and told myself this would be a calm, uneventful place to reset my life. And for the first month, it was exactly that. Quiet mornings, empty evenings. Daniel spent most of his time in his room or out running errands. Always vague, always calm, and we barely crossed paths. But slowly, almost invisibly, the atmosphere began to shift, starting with the silence. Because silence can be louder than noise when it stretches too long. And Daniel never watched TV, never played music, never spoke on the phone, and at night the house felt sealed, like the walls were holding their breath. And then there were the rules that weren't rules at first, just suggestions, like how he asked me not to lock my bedroom door because old locks jam sometimes. Said it with a smile, said it was for safety, and I laughed awkwardly and agreed, not wanting conflict, not realizing how much that small yes would cost me. And things got stranger after that. He started anticipating me, not in obvious ways, but subtle ones, like leaving the bathroom light on when I was about to use it, brewing coffee right before I woke up, commenting on things I hadn't said out loud yet. And I told myself he was just observant, just considerate. But that explanation cracked the night I woke up at 2:17 a.m. to the sound of whispering, low, rhythmic, coming from inside my room, and I shot upright in bed, heart hammering, only to find the room empty, door closed, darkness thick and unmoving. And I didn't sleep after that, instead sitting there until dawn, replaying the sound in my head, convincing myself it was a dream, until it happened again the next night, and the next, always whispering. Never words I could make out, like someone practicing speech, and when I finally asked Daniel if he heard noises at night, he tilted his head, smiled gently, and said, "The house does that sometimes." And something about the way he said it made my skin crawl, like he was proud of it. And after that, the dreams started. Vivid, invasive dreams where I'd wake up unable to move, watching someone stand at the foot of my bed, writing in a notebook, sometimes touching my face, sometimes just staring. And every morning, I'd wake exhausted, sore, with the lingering feeling that sleep wasn't rest anymore. It was exposure. And I started noticing changes in my room, small but undeniable. My closet door slightly open, my shoes repositioned, my laptop moved an inch to the left. Things no one notices unless they're already on edge. And when I confronted Daniel more directly, asked if he ever went into my room, his expression didn't change, but his voice softened even more, said, "I respect boundaries," and then added, "You're very sensitive, though, that can be dangerous." And I laughed it off outwardly while something inside me screamed. And then came the day I found the vent. While rearranging furniture, I noticed the air vent on my wall was loose, not broken, just not secured properly. And when I pulled it off, my hand started shaking because behind it was a small camera, hidden, angled directly at my bed, wired neatly through the wall, and for a moment my brain shut down, refused to process it. And I remember sitting on the floor for a long time, holding that camera like it might bite me, before panic hit full force, and I ran to the living room to confront Daniel. But he wasn't there, his car gone, the house silent again. And that's when I started searching, tearing through drawers, cabinets, places I had no right to be, driven by pure fear, and what I found in the basement changed everything. Shelves lined with labeled boxes, dates stretching back years, each box filled with notebooks, hard drives, printed photos, transcripts of conversations, sleep charts, behavioral notes, and every box had a name on it. Dozens of names, none crossed out, none marked finished. And at the very end, a new box with my name, only partially filled, and my stomach dropped when I realized this wasn't obsession, it was routine. And I didn't wait. I grabbed my essentials, took photos of everything, called the police from my car, and didn't look back. But when officers arrived later, they found nothing. No cameras, no boxes, no notebooks. The basement empty, shelves bare, like the house had been our. He said, and Daniel was gone, his phone disconnected, identity untraceable, and the case stalled quickly, filed under insufficient evidence. But months later, after I'd moved cities, changed jobs, tried to rebuild, I received a package with no return address. Inside was a notebook. My notebook. One I'd never owned, filled with detailed entries about my current life, my new apartment, my commute, my habits, ending with a single line written neatly at the bottom of the last page. You sleep better when you don't fight it. And that's when the worst realization hit me. Heavier than fear, heavier than panic. The house had never been the trap. The roommate had been studying people, learning them, perfecting patience, and once he finished, he didn't need the walls anymore. Because by then, he knew exactly how to follow without being seen.